Welcome back to Tanya and 5. The last few days we've been studying chapter 34. We're now in the final chapter discussing the issue of joy. In this journey to joy, we come to the point where we understood that even as one feels brokenhearted and sometimes even should feel brokenhearted over the distance from God, the end goal is to emerge in joy. Distance from God because the animal soul feels a sense of ego, and joy because my godly soul is allowed expression through Torah and mitzvahs. And then in chapter 33, we described a joy of the soul that comes from its faith. When each person considers the faith he has in God, that God is the only reality, and that even where I am right here, God is present, that brings true joy to the heart and the soul. Then in chapter 34, the Alter Rebbe takes us to the next step in this joy. You see, this faith, that God is the only reality, is really impossible to fully feel and comprehend. Because at the end of the day, I still feel me. So even if I can visualize this idea that God is the only reality, I still haven't really incorporated it because I still feel me. Our forefathers, prophets, were so self-surrendered unto God that they were nothing other than a vehicle for divine expression. But me, us, we have a sense of I. So how do we experience this truth of God that He's the only reality? Now to this, God gave us one of the most wonderful gifts. The gift of Torah. Torah is divine wisdom. It's divine will. It's God speaking and thinking on His own terms. God saying, here's what I want, here's how I think. And God packaged that in such a way that you and I can understand it. And therefore, when we study these words of Torah and we act accordingly, then that thought and that action is, whether we experience it or not, an expression of the oneness of God's truth. Because this is what He wants. And therefore, after I visualized the faith I have in God described in chapter 33, I then say to myself, and I continue, it's true. I don't truly comprehend this truth that God is the only reality. But thank God, and how fortunate and lucky I am that I've been granted the opportunity to do things that will actually realize and actualize this truth that God's the only reality. Because in this Torah, in this mitzvahs, it is indeed true that this is God's reality. This is where God's presence and home is. And how fortunate I am I've been granted these tools. And this can happen 24 hours, not just when I'm actually studying Torah. First of all, God knows that if I had the capacity, I would study all the time. And because I truly feel like I would, if I could, God considers it as if I am. And therefore, even when I'm not actually studying Torah, God knows that I wish I could, and therefore He considers it as if I was studying Torah. Number 2, I can give charity. And when I give charity, produced by my work, by my labor, by my business, then my business, my work, my labor, in which I'm invested all the time, has been elevated, and is really because it's in the service of the charity that I give. And furthermore, everything I do, eat, sleep, drink, make a living, is all so I can serve you, God. It's all in the service of the Torah mitzvahs that I do, and in which I can express God's oneness, in which I can create God's home. The takeaway from all of this is, true joy does not come from that which I can take in life. There's always more to take. I'm never going to be satisfied. And there are others who are taking out of life much more. True joy comes from what I can give to life. The Torah mitzvahs that I do, nobody else can do. The part of the world that God needs me to make as a home for Him, nobody else can. So let us take these opportunities to give to God's purpose in a joyful and happy way. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 35.